Hey there, I'm Melina Jubilaro. I'm a journalist from Canada who decided to take a year off to travel the world. Along the way, I've met some fascinating people who I believe are making a difference on this planet. Join me as I take you in their homes to discover their fascinating lives. Leaving home years ago, artist Victoria Royds never imagined returning to Braidwood. 10 years later, she's been breeding cows with her mother, Margaret. Now, since 2012, Victoria Royds has planted over 17,000 trees on about 2,000 acres of land. She is now focusing on keeping her herd healthy and improving soil health through applying the principles of holistic management framework.
This stump is the only remnant tree on the property. It's the only tree that was native to the farm. And it died probably 80 years ago, or 60 years ago, or more, you know, at least probably 8 years ago. So there is no native vegetation on the farm. And when we get up the top, you'll see there's very little, there've been some trees planted. So, you know, we get some pretty serious, sometimes hot winds here in the summer, which dries the landscape out. And also there's no shade for stock.
Yeah.
And also for habitat. So getting trees and shrubs coming in, bringing birds into the environment, you're actually creating a more biodiversity. So you're getting, the birds are bringing fertility in, especially if they're, you know, you can get your birds and things coming to the tops of the hills, then they're bringing fertility up to the top of the hill, and then it's gravity fed down. But you know, that's so it's as many layers as possible. I am trying to create, and also when I'm often making tree lanes, I'm using those as dividing fences. So when I first came here, there was 20 paddocks. Now there's 60, and I need a lot more because they're still too big, especially now that the herd's smaller. You're not getting grazing impact. So how much do you know about holistic management?
We don't.
You don't? Okay.
What's holistic management?
Yeah, what does it mean?
What holistic management? Well, holistic management is looking at, well, whole is meaning, in the Greek it's the whole like in English. So everything. So it's not just about grazing management, although there is a certain grazing management plans that we do for cattle, but it's also looking at financial, it's looking at environmental, it's looking at social, it's looking, so it's all aspects of how we engage in life. So you don't have to be a farmer to be a holistic manager.
Okay.
In fact, most businesses, any business can run it, because everything you do has some impact on the environment. If it's where you buy your food, or buying a car, or you know, all our decisions do have some impact on the environment. And so there are a whole lot of testing questions that when you're making decisions about things, you can run through and see how sustainable they are, if it's going to upset anybody, if it's going to be financially. So holistic management is really the whole thing, but most people who are doing holistic management around the world are involved in agriculture in some way. So they've got a bit of land that they're trying to manage. And so with the grazing management, holistic management or regenerative agriculture, it's the same sort of thing. It's just that holistic management's a framework. It's not a set of rules. It's a framework to work within, and everybody's farm, everybody's direction and what they want from their farm or from their future or their life. You know, just, do you want to have every weekend holiday, or do you want to, you know, create? So for me, it's about creating a healthy environment where the soil's healthy and vibrant, and there's lots of microorganisms happening there. So to do that, you need to be able to manage the grass and the cattle.
So how do you do that? Because we hear a lot now, you know, that eating beef is not good for the environment. And so how can you say that you're
holistic, but then have cattle. So how does that
Cattle
work?
are actually the best. I'll just shut this gate and we'll
Yeah.
go back down. But cattle are one of the best ways to regenerate soil health. And there's a lot of people out there, they've got their hearts and minds in the right direction, but they don't necessarily understand how soil and soil health, and to get healthy soil you need good grass cover. Now, cattle have been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
We've domesticated them, yes, but there are more bovines, there were more bovines on the planet than there are now. And so they're an easy out. Oh, they produce methane. But how many people even know where the methane comes from? Do you know which end of the cow that methane comes out?
I don't know.
No, so most people, because especially in Australia, because it's like a dirty thing that it comes out their arse, it's farting. It's not, it's from their mouth. So there's misinformation that's out there that doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. And within holistic management or in regenerative agriculture, we're trying to not just look at one little aspect, we're trying to make the whole system work.
With the cattle.
With the cattle,
Yeah.
with the people, with the everything. And so humans basically do need to eat protein in some way, and yes, cattle take up a bit of land, but we couldn't grow vegetables or cropping here, so it's not suitable. We've already changed the whole environment. In the last 200 years it was managed by the indigenous people. We've got a whole thing of obesity around the world. We've got all this breakdown of health, and yet we're meant to be in the 21st century and no more. And in some ways we are less healthy than we were 50 years ago because the food we're eating doesn't have the nutrition anymore, because the soil, the plants can't get the nutrition from the soil because we've killed most of the microbiology that's happening there. And there are a lot of people who know lots about the microbiology that's happening in the soil, but nobody knows everything because it's like an unknown thing. There's more things happening down there than are up here. We know probably more about the moon than the soil that we live on. So, so with the management of the cattle, what we're trying to replicate a little bit is how the big herds of bison or you know, any of those big herd animals, if it was in Africa or America or wherever, how they went across the landscape. So in America they talk about when white man first went there, talked about how they saw these huge herds of bison that would go on for days.
Yeah.
And they'd walk through the landscape. So you can imagine what they were doing. They were eating, defecating, and then and breaking the surface of the soil sometime, laying grass down on the ground. So they're creating mulch, and then they're moving on because they've muddied that part, and they go on and they might come back in a year's time. So that landscape's then, the grass needs to be eaten to stimulate it to grow properly. That's how it's developed over the time. And laying grass and things on the ground, then you're creating some mulch so that you're creating litter so it decomposes, and you're starting to, that's the cycle of starting to build soil carbon. Yeah, so we're trying to replicate that, but because now they're not wild animals and we're controlling the landscape, we keep, with holistic management, it's trying to have all your animals in one mob and have small paddocks, so they go in, it's intense grazing, and then you move them, so you're moving them more frequently and having longer rest periods. So some people maybe 6, 9, 12 months rest for each paddock. So the more paddocks you've got, the longer each paddock can rest. It's a simple thing. If you've got one paddock, there's no rest. If you divide it in half, you've got if you divide it in 4, you might have been grazing all this. It would have been, what happens if they're in a big paddock and they're left for a long period of time is they go around and eat all the lollies. You know, they eat all the sweet grasses, all the bits, and so after a period of time they can actually mean that you lose your best grasses out of the paddocks, and you only have limited amounts. And the cattle will eat the weeds. They'll eat everything, but they don't want all weeds. Like we don't want, you know,
The same thing all the time.
All the same, or they don't want all lettuce, or we don't want all one vegetable or one thing all the time. We want variety because we need that for our health. The same with the cattle. They'll eat a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They might eat a little bit of thistle because it's bringing up minerals from deep down because it's got a really long taproot that the grasses can't get it. So the more variety of grasses and forbs and herbs you can have growing, the better for the whole environment. So it is about creating more biodiversity, more density of plants. And
it's possible to do that with cattle then, finally.
It's the easiest and cheapest way really to do it because the cows, they're an income stream for a start, and so they need the grass, and you don't have to do anything. I mean, you could do it by going out and slashing, and but you're using diesel, which is a fossil fuel. It's not sustainable practice. You might do it occasionally. You might do other things occasionally, but cattle are probably one of the best because they've got a hardened hoof. In Australia, we used to, and when I was here in the 80s, I would have said the same, that the cattle were the thing and sheep were the thing that had destroyed the landscape. On one hand, yes, they had, but it wasn't the cattle themselves, it was the humans that are managing the cattle. It's not the cattle's fault, it's not the cow's fault, it's not the sheep's fault, it's not any particular animal, it's how us as humans manage them. And with fences or no fences or whatever, we basically are managing most of the planet. Even the big forests, we're either managing them to keep things out or let things in. We're not letting nature just look after itself. So when the sheep and cattle came in, these areas were really rich in native grasses and a grass called microlina, which may be some growing just down there. Till this year, I didn't see any microlina on this property because it's been so heavily fertilised and cultivated. This paddock here has been ploughed so many times, and one of my brothers, when he ploughed it, half of it blew away, and the fence over there is half under soil. I think I should leave that fence there for future so we know what it looks like. So, for a start, we shouldn't be ploughing because when we plough we expose the soil. There's nothing protecting it, kills the microbiology. Gets too hot, too cold, can blow away, can wash away, all those sorts of things. So not that we can't plant things, but there are other ways of doing it, like no-kill cropping or pasture cropping, or planting when other plants aren't growing, and all those sorts of things. But yeah, so people, they came in with their sheep, but they were grazing in the one's place, or they didn't, just so that basically our management has changed. And then since the Second World War, that's intensified with industrial agriculture and putting, superphosphate at limited amounts may be okay, but when you start putting it out all the time, there's a lot of kill and it's not utilised. So we're trying to get things back to a system that actually is helping itself to repair.